Now, a majority of South Africans believe that economic conditions are worse now than they were a year ago, and fewer than half expect things to get better. Those are the grim findings of a new Afrobarometer survey. It shows that a large proportion of the population experiences shortages of food, clean water, medical care and income, basic necessities. And a majority think that the government is doing a poor job of reducing the income inequality. To unpack this further, I'm joined by the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation's Jaynisha Patel. Jaynisha, many thanks for joining us this evening. I mean, a really dire picture that South Africans are painting about the lives that they currently live in the country. But before we get into the nitty-gritties of this particular report, some of the key highlights that it brought out.
Good evening to you and to your viewers. Thanks for having me on. I think, our analysis that we've done, especially with our module on the economy, has two levels to it. And so the first level is really trying to understand how South Africans perceive the condition of the economy and how they feel it's being managed. And the second level is then how South Africans feel about their own personal material circumstances and how they've been treated because of their socioeconomic status. And so one is quite an interpersonal analysis, while the other looks at South Africans' perceptions of a sort of more macroeconomic look on the economy. And as you said, just a couple minutes ago, the outlook is quite grim. On the condition of the national economy, 7 in 10 South Africans say that it is in fairly or very bad shape, and that's up from 5 in 10 who said the same thing a decade ago. And then, 6 in 10 people say that the state of the economy is worse than it was 12 years ago. And this is especially interesting because a year ago we were in the midst of a stricter lockdown, and this might indicate that South Africans are sort of worse off now than they were back then, which is quite scary. On the other hand, though, South Africans feel optimistic. 46% of people say that they think the economy will be better in a year from now. So that gives us a good overview of how South Africans feel, about the economy itself. But then we have a look at how South Africans feel the government is handling this particular economic crisis. And what we see is a largely unfavorable public opinion towards the state. And this specifically is across indicators of inclusive development, which is a stated policy from the government itself. Most people, or a large majority of people, say that the state is doing really badly at handling inequality, or rather narrowing the gap between the rich and the poor, keeping prices stable, improving the living standards of the poor, and just overall management of the economy. One optimistic finding is that people are quite satisfied with how the government managed the economic impacts of the lockdown. And so that quite speaks to the first level of our analysis, which is how South Africans feel about the economy and how the state is managing it. And then, there's a second layer of our analysis, which is a little bit more interpersonal. And we ask South Africans to tell us how they feel about their personal living conditions and also to what extent they're experiencing material deprivation.
Very interesting insights here, and of course you go by provinces, and I'm just interested to know the provinces where people were the most economically insecure, their participation in the economy being very limited. Where did you find that most of these people are?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, again, this speaks to the second layer of our analysis, which is, the interpersonal level of how people perceive their own personal living conditions and to what extent they feel materially deprived. And so before I get into the sort of provincial breakdown, let me just sort of share with your viewers a little bit more about how South Africans feel about their own personal living conditions. And this, again, is an extremely subjective sort of question because everyone has different standards for what's acceptable. But about half of South Africans say that their living standards are good, and the other half say that they're bad or fairly bad. And when it comes to looking at provinces in particular, of those who say that their living conditions are bad, the largest share live in the Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, and Mpumalanga, while those who live in the Free State, the Northwest and Limpopo, are least likely to say that their living conditions are bad. And then sort of somewhere in the middle of this sort of the worst of it and the best of it, we have our most developed provinces or our most urbanized provinces, being Gauteng and the Western Cape, where about 41% and 45% of people say their living conditions are quite bad. But another question that we break down by province is to what extent people go without an income. And we look at this one in particular because the Afrobarometer asks quite an interesting set of questions to measure material deprivation. And we asked to what extent people, or how often people go without certain material necessities. One of them being a cash income, the other being clean water, cooking fuel, food, and medical care. And we find that 46% of South Africans, and so that's almost 1 in 2 people, say that they have had to go without a cash income specifically several times, many times, or always. And then when we look at that by province, again, we see the exact same provinces coming out on the top in terms of people most likely to experience income insecurity, and that's in Mpumalanga, where 66% of people say they often go without a cash income, followed by the Eastern Cape, where 58% of people say they often go without a cash income, and then KZN at 48% of people. On the other end of the spectrum, people are least likely to say they go without a cash income in Limpopo, the Northern Cape, and the Northwest.
Excuse me, those are very interesting insights. And I'm just wondering, as a final thought from you, it's going to be very important for government to continue with initiatives that they initiated, this being the stress relief grant, the reconstruction development plan that they've developed, so that the sentiment and the outlook by South Africans can perhaps change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when it comes to public trust, the Afrobarometer generally finds that trust is sort of depleting or eroding in public institutions. And so there's a lot of work to be done to sort of restore that trust. And a large part of that is to deliver material gains to South Africans. We see that scarcity and insecurity are threats to national stability, and we've seen that this year in an unprecedented way. And so these findings really suggest that decisive and targeted government action is a matter of urgency.